Arriving on a plane from a flight departing from New York, USA as the fourth man in to speak to the assembly of persons made his appearance. 'Twas only minutes after he'd apologized for once again making the remark when 'twas said following this incident that he'd really apologized for leaving the microphone hot and on instead of for making good for his unsavory comment and indiscretion. Guilford Winston Bates saying from within microphone's earshot, addressing NASA who was sitting next to him and after the latter had his piece to commit after Alexandres, as I said we do in the least bit injure our bottom line as what they can afford to invest into the biomatrix purse after the defeat of their army does scarcely at all supersede what they could before the defeat and its any adopting into their lives, as with the Christians these are liabilities then, sheeple and easily led, or misled, of another kind. Really, Israel inherits then quite the sizable deficit that, and who's this speaking from the microphone before you? Added he then, thinking the transference of his voice as one that was limited by the microphone where the hosting Krishinochev turned to this time beckoned for him, that his enemies could only advantage, NASA was trying to get his attention, pointing discreetly and as though cowering for the man by the manner in how he aligned a lips crossing vertical forefinger against his lower chin while both lifting and lowering his glance toward and then away from the speaker, both the people to add into numbers and the lands from which to, and, stirring some at the increased volume of the applause just to learn that 'twas for his invitation to take the microphone and begin addressing them, oh, already. Well that was, he stood to bend over the chair he was sitting in to retrieve his folder, my apologies, almost missed my cue. As if he hadn't already, and, only minutes later after Krishinochev had stepped aside, making way to the foot of the stage for Bates who was waving to the crowd with his fashioned wire-rimmed glasses absorbing the purple lights beaming down from track lighting overhead to render more enhanced and darker the natural color of his eyeglass lenses tinted purple, thereby pasting a close-up of his image to the people watching world around. The last sight the outside attendees in Moscow would see was his smiling face when it happened. What was it? This alone is a peculiar item of recall, as, to quote one news reporter, he was like the phoenix hovering over the pyre of destruction there, caught in mid-strike seconds after greeting the attendees and the camera. All around him on that expansive television screen in Moscow obliterated, and just what in Sam hell was that omniplex's screen made of? Only it is as though constructed of reinforced titanium left ungrazed. Whereas people lay dead both beneath and to its either side, amid carnage and rubble. Outside of the hall with the two men trading speaking sessions in the forefront of small chatter from mumbling persons on location spectating and from curious ones gathering around them with hands and heads on intervals indicating the large corner-hugging concave plasma screen outside of the proceeding, where had sounded the bombastic and incordial earth-upending disruptions. Choreographed mayhem with a horrid yet multi-scaled octave shrill singing voices waves of limb-motoring rampage cacophonously dismantled and struck accordingly with shrilly voiced shorn regular exhibitions of technological aerospace-type marvels routinely seen. How far industry had come was faced with the dissolution of advancement factor that would seem to alone be terrorism's chief accomplishment. Attaching Russia's motherland metropolis with areas accessible to the airport and exit ways throughout the city. Triggered only where it was attached to the motive, detonating more riotous chaos during the innermost peak of blossoming bustle that hosted the larger throngs during peak hours these days of subway activity that would perchance only later more concretely attest. Concrete itself became ensilicon sand set ablaze. Attest to what? The flight of steel manhole covers slicing through the air and slamming through the double-decker bus and fatally impacting its passengers, thereby sounding a vigorous well competing with the stilled vertigo still subjected to inflexible inertial or defied inside or the sickening sound from crying infants held in arms and towed in the hands of parents in hysterics. No, only the silent mouths and feet moved and shuffled here to this melodrama seeming to transpire in slow, even reverse motion. Bloody motion. Arms and faces impacted by exploding glass and things besides, much damage yet fully defined, not the least of which resulted from the tiger-toothed spearing limbs from uprooted and airborne trees becoming like malevolent daggers. From the little tykes, the sights on sidewalks and the artery of highway and its intersecting throughways rendering again a deafening silence, the stricken ears shielded from their young eyes. The sidewalks that would largely, because of the molecular interplay and the glinting sun's reflecting impact once sounding like a musical grace that hither and now quarreled with the brute imposition of encroaching shadow, observing how reluctance of shadow to lift the smoke and elements lower with the crushing mayhem in the tremendous thuds and with asphyxiating heart-wounding cries, ghost-like and birthed of the several decibel shattering blistering emanations not unlike them, offered no solace. Voices of dispirited surprise and wounded injury sounded from persons and from the heated inanimate set ablaze as skyrail structures like some stretches of pavement at first gasping and then choking and then melting while rocking and reeling as large toothy sections split from cemented tie rods turned into spheres with their encasing water clusters overhead slamming, for a host of fleeing persons clutching hands to bosom and over top of heads as though to dig for entrenched foxhole inside in the battle for scurrying sanity. The fleetingly conceived good news on a thinning shred of hope's inelasticity here was that you could perchance outwardly attest to the drama as the throttling and unforgiving rain pummeled as the only certain fact yet, as overhead planes and the onlookers who were viewing from tall stretches of towering buildings, outwardly divining the appeal of inner horizon as frontal bless of the glossy brochures, could similarly attest. 3 of such buildings in the flash of an eye devolving from thriving assets to polar opposite when shifted to the same estate plan and insurance justifying liability column when these structures followed suit of the skyrails and shelters leading down to subway stations. The people escaping above ground only to behold what rained down from rails overhead. It was as birds flocking conflagrations while flittering from their symphonic expanding fold that had transmuted and narrowed to constricted panicky flight, the motion alone calling down to people where all of sound was really like an inarticulate hum as explosions stitched together their stilling rhapsody defying our musical interlude. For the longest time, people could only stare into each other's faces, swallowing hard and remaining silent for what words could in the least bit for interpretation's sake dignify. Commuter and pedestrian watching as tunnel inlets into the city under some hostile force yet unknown disappeared to make one with the mountain overtop, alike attesting to gushing oil from vehicles set ablaze and rendering the shining sun overhead as distant and even barricaded backdrop with crushed pipeline from street and threading metalworks labyrinth spewing hot rebuking steams of combustible retort and smoke into the air with colors of rainbow prism somehow luridly making the ominous spectacle out of this most recent intruder making of conspiring mist and fog some phantasmagorical beast of nemesis as upending door without grimace wearing same transparent halos for some unholy portent only as onlookers during this moment during rush hour, albeit revised in tandem with deemed bliss or concerns, they started to subconsciously think on those alerts somehow leading to the determination that some terroristic threats could in comparison to the so-called greater concerns be written off as only veiled and revivifying only on ripples of rumor that could be as easily dismissed by them as could be forecasts for a halcyon picturesque day by the surfer determined to ride instigating wind and wave, so attested the in-the-know authorities with unprivy intel who were largely in the business of concealing the larger portion of same intel over what they'd had stamped in ink on pages of classified drafts in endossier briefs. Was it another earthquake as the site had the physical earmarkings of such all over it? Only if the same would announce itself as video reels of footage highlighting suspicious activity hadn't given a clue to what also had left its covered prints all over it, as the many box trucks were by their motorists abandoned where scarcely left to motor and slam on into Moscow's underground rail stations. Authorities, some of whom were watching from inside the event, could have easily concluded even before the bombs exploded conveniently during the same blackout inside the auditorium, and who knew where else. The images everywhere and multitudinous reflected much of the unconscionable whereas the image last seen on the concave bow of screen wrapping around the convention hall's corner lawn was the stilled video that featured the almost cherubic bird-like facial image of Guilford Winston Bates, one finger crooked as though shushing and held into the air with his mouth left open to form a lopsided oblong shape, cranked in oratorios mid-stride, as twere, with the silhouetted images of the both fleeing and impaled persons inside caught inside of only either of his spectacles lens frames as reflected images that were stilled as though beheld in the viewing area of the kaleidoscope caught in time unlike the blood-curdling all that surrounded the stampeding crowd and the fiery environment. A heartwarming smile, almost, and as easy to digest as might be the depiction of abortion outside of the womb or botched brain hemorrhage and surgery gone bad. The Iranian, more toward a conventional tale if scarcely the common one, 'twas decided upon by certain members of the Tribunal World Court, should meet with an inglorious but just end, 'twas decided by committees issuing international arrest and detainment warrants executable within certain global providences, as with Nasser unlike his fellow speakers on this afternoon the conglomerate had scarcely to make it out of the inside hall on his own accord and free volition and cognizances, yet if these were but Frankenstein monsters who, pray tell, was their good doctor and what precisely had called for the attending of the tech billionaire at such an emergency scheduled summit of a kind? The benign carcinoma is the hidden small print to the colossal outbreak that would spread its wings inside of inhabitable human disembodied spirits as terrorists and invisible contagion to the as unseen hypodermic needles uniting heads of fiendish will without magnanimous hearts together.
Eli James, all rights reserved 2023. Today's December 4th, 2025. Eli James Literary Productions, writer and producer of the production, which is coming out in all four formats and will soon be available at several retailers, both brick and mortar and digital.